It's funny how fast everything can fall apart. 17 years of marriage, gone in less than 10 minutes. I stood there in the entryway of our home, my home, the one I'd spent years fixing up, watching my wife, Clarissa, laugh like I was some kind of joke. No divorce papers needed. Just leave, she said, her voice sharp and cold, like she'd been waiting to say it for months. She barely even looked at me. Her new boyfriend, Reed, was right there beside her, grinning like he'd just won some big prize. He kicked off his muddy shoes and plopped them right on the coffee table I'd built with my own hands years ago. The wood was scratched now, scuffed from his careless feet, and I felt this tight knot in my chest. But I didn't say anything. What was there to say? She'd made up her mind, and I wasn't about to beg. I turned away from them and walked upstairs to our bedroom. The room smelled like her perfume still, that floral stuff she'd worn since we were dating. I grabbed my suitcase from the closet, the old black one with the broken zipper I'd been meaning to replace. I started folding my clothes, shirts first, then pants, then socks. I took my time, making sure every crease was neat, every stack perfect. It wasn't about stalling. It was about keeping my hands busy so I wouldn't punch something. Downstairs, I could hear them talking, laughing even. Reed's voice was loud, cocky, like he owned the place already. Nice house, I heard him say. Could use some updating, though. Updating. Like he had any right to judge what I'd built. I zipped the suitcase shut and carried it down the stairs. Clarissa was leaning against the kitchen counter now, sipping a glass of wine, my wine, from the bottle I bought for our anniversary last month. She didn't even glance up as I walked past. Reed was sprawled out on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV like he'd lived there forever. I stopped at the front door, my hand on the knob, and took one last look around. The pictures on the wall, us at the beach, us at her cousin's wedding, stared back at me like ghosts. 17 years of memories, and she was throwing it all away for this guy. I could have yelled. I could have demanded an explanation. But what would that change? She'd already checked out. So I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cool, the night quiet except for the hum of crickets. I tossed my suitcase into the back of my truck, an old pickup I'd kept running since before we got married. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. My hands gripped the wheel tight, my knuckles white. Clarissa thought she'd humiliated me, that she'd won some kind of victory by kicking me out like that. She had no idea who I really was. No clue what was coming. I drove down the street, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not anymore. It was something calmer, something sharper. She wanted me gone? Fine. I'd leave. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I pulled into a gas station a few miles away and parked under the flickering lights. My phone sat heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out, opened the contacts, and scrolled to a number saved only as command. My thumb hovered over it for a second before I typed out a quick message. Initiate. Subject confirmed. Proceeding as planned. I hit send and leaned back in the seat, waiting. The reply came almost instantly. All teams ready. Phase 1 begins 0900. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. 17 years of pretending, of hiding, and now it was all about to unravel. Clarissa thought she'd seen the last of me. She thought I was just some boring guy she could toss aside. She didn't know the truth. Not yet. I started the truck again and drove toward the city. My mind was racing, but my hands were steady. I'd spent years building a life with her, playing the part she wanted me to play. The quiet husband, the guy who fixed the leaky sink and paid the bills on time. She never asked about my late nights, my business trips, the locked drawer in my office she wasn't allowed to touch. She didn't care enough to wonder. And maybe that was the real problem. I wasn't just leaving the house tonight. I was leaving the lie I'd lived for her. The gas station lights faded behind me as I merged onto the highway, the road stretching out dark and empty. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she'd find out what she'd really thrown away. And me? I'd finally stop pretending. I drove through the night, the highway lights blurring past like streaks of yellow paint. My truck's engine rumbled steady under me, a familiar sound that kept me grounded while my mind spun. Clarissa's words kept echoing in my head. No divorce papers needed. Just leave. The way she'd laughed, like I was nothing, stung more than I wanted to admit. 17 years, and she'd tossed me out like an old pair of shoes. Reed's smug face flashed in my mind too, his feet on my coffee table, his voice bouncing around my house like he belonged there. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening again. But I didn't let myself get lost in that. Not now. There was too much to do. I glanced at my phone on the passenger seat. The screen was still lit up from that message I'd sent. Initiate. Subject confirmed. Proceeding as planned. The reply from command glowed back at me. All teams ready. Phase 1 begins 0900. It was real now. No turning back. I'd always known this day might come, but I never thought it'd be like this. My own wife kicking me out and handing me the perfect opening all at once. She thought I was some boring accountant, stuck in a cubicle crunching numbers for the government. I let her think that. It was easier that way. Safer, too. She didn't need to know about the late-night meetings, the classified files, the times I'd come home with bruises I blamed on tripping down the stairs. She never pushed for more. Never cared enough to ask. The road stretched out ahead, dark and quiet except for the occasional headlights of a passing car. I turned off the highway after about an hour and headed toward a spot I hadn't been to in months, a safe house tucked away in the woods outside the city. The Bureau called it a black safe, a place off the grid where agents like me could lay low when things got messy. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the cabin. It didn't look like much, just a small wooden shack with a sagging porch and a rusty mailbox. Perfect cover. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped out, the cool night air hitting my face. The crickets were loud here, a steady hum that drowned out the noise in my head. Inside, the place was bare. A couch, a table, a single lamp flickering with a weak bulb. No pictures, no decorations, just the essentials. I dropped my bag by the door and checked my watch. It was just past midnight. 9 hours until phase 1. I pulled out my phone again and double-checked the signal. Full bars. Good. I need to stay connected. Then I sat on the couch, leaning my head back against the worn cushions. My eyes drifted to the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the wood. This wasn't how I pictured my life at 45, hiding out in a safe house, my marriage in ashes, my wife shacked up with some sleazy guy. But maybe it was better this way. Cleaner. Clarissa never knew what I really did. I told her I worked for the Treasury Department, some desk job tracking budgets and tax forms. It wasn't a total lie, just vague enough to keep her from digging. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned work, muttering about how dull it sounded. Spreadsheets and coffee stains, she'd say, laughing. I'd laugh too, playing along. She didn't know about the encrypted emails, the burner phones, the times I'd sat in unmarked vans watching targets through binoculars. She didn't know I'd spent the last 3 years tracking a guy like Reed, piecing together his dirty money schemes while she was busy planning dinners and scrolling through her phone. And she definitely didn't know that her soulmate was the key to it all. I stood up and paced the small room, my boots thudding against the floorboards. The safe house had a tiny kitchen in the corner, a sink, a stove, a fridge that hummed too loud. I opened it and found a can of soda, cracked it open, and took a long sip. The cold fizz settled my nerves a bit. I thought about tomorrow, 9 a.m., when the teams would move in. I could already picture it. The black SUVs rolling up, the agents knocking on the door, Clarissa's sleepy confusion turning to panic. She'd have no idea what hit her. Neither would Reed. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Back on the couch, I pulled a small notebook from my suitcase. It was beat up, the leather cover scratched and worn. Inside were notes I'd kept over the years, codes, dates, names. Nothing too specific, just enough to jog my memory if I needed it. I flipped to a page near the back, where I'd written RV months ago. Reed Vallon. I'd been watching him long before Clarissa brought him home. Long before she decided he was her ticket out of our marriage. I tapped the page with my finger, staring at his initials. She thought she'd humiliated me tonight. She thought she'd won. But she didn't know the game had already started, and I was the one holding the cards. I set the notebook down and checked my phone again. No new messages. Good. Everything was on track. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. The safe house was quiet except for that fridge hum and the crickets outside. Tomorrow, it'd all kick off. Tomorrow, Clarissa would see a side of me she'd never imagined. I wasn't just the guy she kicked out. I was the guy who'd been waiting for this moment, planning it, building it. And now it was here. I finished the soda, crushed the can in my hand, and tossed it into the trash. Then I lay down on the couch, my arm under my head. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but I didn't care. I had work to do. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The safe house was cold when I woke up, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes you wish you'd packed an extra jacket. I'd barely slept, maybe a couple of hours on that lumpy couch, my mind too wired to shut off. The clock on my phone said 6:47 a.m. Just over 2 hours until phase 1. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, the faint light of dawn creeping through the cabin's dusty blinds. My suitcase was still by the door where I'd left it, my notebook on the table, open to Reed's initials. RV. Today was the day he'd go down, and Clarissa with him, whether she knew it or not. I stood and stretched, my back cracking from the stiff cushions. The safe house smelled like old wood and damp air, but it was home for now. I walked to the tiny kitchen, filled a chipped mug with water from the sink, and drank it down fast. No coffee here, but I didn't need it. Adrenaline was already kicking in, sharp and steady. I grabbed my phone and checked for updates. A new message from command. Teams in position. Rendezvous 0800. Black safe confirmed secure. Good. Everything was moving like clockwork. I replied with a quick copy. En route. Then I pulled on my boots, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The morning air was crisp, the woods around the cabin silent except for a few birds chirping. My truck sat where I'd parked it, dew clinging to the windshield. I climbed in, started the engine, and let it warm up while I wiped the glass clear with my sleeve. The drive to the rendezvous point wasn't far, about 20 minutes to a warehouse on the edge of town, another spot the Bureau kept off the books. I pulled onto the gravel road, my tires crunching loud in the stillness. My mind drifted back to last night, Clarissa's laugh, Reed's smug grin. I'd spent 17 years with her, building a life, a home, and she'd thrown it away without a second thought. But that wasn't what kept me up. It was the irony of it all. Her new boyfriend wasn't just some random guy. He was my target. See, I'd been working Reed Vallen's case for 3 years. 3 years of late nights, fake identities, and digging through financial records so tangled it'd make your head spin. He was a hedge fund manager on paper, fancy suits, slick hair, the kind of guy who bragged about his yacht at parties. But underneath it, he was dirty, laundering millions through offshore art deals and crypto scams, moving cash for some nasty people. I tracked him across state lines, tapped his calls, watched his every move. And then, 6 months ago, Clarissa brought him home. "This is Reed," she'd said, all smiles, like she'd found gold. My soulmate. I'd nearly choked on my beer. Soulmate? He was my mark. I didn't tell her, of course. Couldn't. My job, my real job, depended on secrecy. She thought I was just some government pencil pusher, and I let her. It was safer that way. The less she knew, the less she could mess up. But I never thought she'd get tangled in it like this. I pulled into the warehouse lot at 7:58 a.m., parking beside a row of black SUVs. Agent Rowan was already there, leaning against his vehicle, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He'd been my partner for 8 years, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a dry sense of humor. "Morning, sunshine," he said, flicking ash onto the ground. "Rough night?" I shrugged. "You could say that." Inside the warehouse, Director Keller was waiting. He was older, gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of man who didn't waste words. A table was set up with laptops, maps, and a stack of files, Reed's life in paper form. "You're sure about this?" Keller asked, looking at me over his glasses. "She's your wife." I corrected. "She made her choice." He nodded, no judgment, just facts. Rowan clapped me on the shoulder. "Let's bury this bastard," he said, grinning. I didn't smile back, but I felt it, the fire. This wasn't just about Reed anymore. It was personal. We went over the plan one last time. Surveillance teams were already in place around the house, ready to move at 9 a.m. sharp. Another unit was hitting Reed's office downtown, seizing computers, freezing accounts. The evidence was airtight, bank records, wire transfers, even a recorded call where he bragged about cleaning cash. I built this case brick by brick, and now it was time to knock it all down. Keller handed me a headset. "You're on comms," he said. "Eyes on the feed. Call the shots if it goes sideways." I nodded, slipping it on. My heart was steady, my hands calm. This was what I was good at. I thought about Clarissa again as we loaded up. She'd never seen this side of me, the guy who could take down a criminal empire without blinking. To her, I was just the husband who forgot to mow the lawn sometimes, who worked late and came home quiet. She didn't know about the black safes, the undercover ops, the times I'd stared down worse men than Reed. And she didn't know that her soulmate was about to drag her into a mess she couldn't talk her way out of. I climbed into the van with Rowan, the doors slamming shut behind us. The screens flickered to life, showing live feeds from the house. Clarissa's car was still in the driveway. Reed's too. They had no idea what was coming. The clock hit 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes to go. I leaned back in my seat, watching the screens, my mind clear. This was my world, hidden, sharp, real. Clarissa thought she'd humiliated me last night, kicking me out for her shiny new boyfriend. But she didn't know the secrets I'd buried, the life I'd kept from her. She didn't know that I'd been waiting for this, that Reed walking into our house was the last piece I needed. The van rolled out, tires humming against the pavement. Phase 1 was about to start. And I was ready. The van smelled like stale coffee and metal as we rolled toward the house, the screens in front of me flickering with live feeds. It was 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes until everything kicked off. I adjusted my headset, the static crackling in my ear as Rowan muttered something about traffic. My eyes were locked on the monitors, 2 angles of the house I used to call home. The front porch was quiet, the curtains still drawn. Clarissa's car sat in the driveway next to Reed's flashy BMW. They were probably still asleep, tangled up in the sheets I'd paid for, thinking they'd won. My stomach twisted, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about the job. The clock hit 9 a.m., and the radio buzzed to life. Team Alpha in position, a voice said. Team Beta, office site secured. Awaiting your go. I took a breath, my voice steady. Go, I said. And just like that, it started. On the screen, 3 black SUVs pulled up fast, tires screeching as agents spilled out, vests on, guns ready but low. They moved like a machine, 2 to the front door, 2 around back, 1 on lookout. I watched as Agent Torres, a guy I'd trained with years ago, banged on the door. FBI, search warrant. Open up. His voice was loud, sharp, cutting through the morning quiet. For a second, nothing happened. Then the curtains twitched, and I saw Clarissa's face peek out, her eyes wide and sleepy. She opened the door a crack, still in her robe, her hair messy from sleep. What's going on? She asked, her voice shaky. Torres didn't waste time. FBI. We have a warrant. Step aside. He pushed past her, the team following, and I saw her stumble back, clutching the robe tighter. Reed came stumbling down the stairs a second later, shirtless, his hair sticking up. What the hell is this? He yelled, but the moment he saw the badges, his face went pale. He bolted toward the back door, stupid move. 2 agents were already there, grabbing him before he made it 10 steps. I heard the cuffs click through the comms, a satisfying sound. Reed Vallon, you're under arrest, one of them said, reading off the charges, racketeering, money laundering, fraud. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Clarissa was screaming now, her voice shrill on the feed. What the hell is going on? Somebody tell me. She spun around, looking at the agents tearing through the house, ripping open drawers, bagging laptops, flipping cushions. Nobody answered her. They didn't have to. I watched her sink onto the couch, her hands shaking, her eyes darting everywhere. She didn't get it yet, but she would soon. On the second screen, the office raid was in full swing, Reed's downtown setup, all glass and steel, swarming with agents. His staff stood frozen as computers were unplugged, files boxed up, accounts locked down. I leaned closer, my pulse steady. This was it, the takedown I'd spent 3 years building. Office secure, Beta team reported. Evidence in hand. Heading to processing. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. Copy, I said. Alpha, status? Torres's voice came back. How secure? Subject in custody. Secondary occupant detained for questioning. Secondary occupant. That was Clarissa. I saw her on the feed, an agent standing over her, asking questions she couldn't answer. I don't know anything. She kept saying, her voice breaking. This is my house. You can't do this. But they could. They had the warrant, the evidence, the years of work I'd put in. She didn't know it was me behind it all, not yet. Rowan nudged me, pointing at the screen. She's losing it, he said, almost laughing. I didn't smile. Watching her fall apart wasn't fun. It was just necessary. The agents found a safe in the bedroom, my bedroom, hidden behind a painting I'd hung years ago. They cracked it open, pulling out stacks of cash, a burner phone, some papers I couldn't make out. Reed's stash, no doubt. Clarissa's face went white when she saw it. That's not mine, she yelled. I don't know where that came from. Maybe she didn't. But it didn't matter. She'd let him in, taken his gifts, played along. That made her part of it, whether she meant to or not. The feed showed Reed in cuffs now, shoved into the back of an SUV. He was sweating, his cocky grin long gone. I want my lawyer, he kept saying, like that'd save him. It wouldn't. We had him cold, bank records, wiretaps, witnesses. 3 years of my life, boiled down to this moment. I leaned back in the van's chair, the headset pressing against my ear. The house was a mess now, furniture overturned, closets emptied. Clarissa sat there, head in her hands, crying. An agent handed her a tissue, but she didn't take it. She just kept muttering, "This can't be happening." I thought about last night, her laughing, telling me to leave. She thought she was in control, that she'd humiliated me. Now look at her. The radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, evidence secured. Moving to transport." I glanced at Rowan. "Office hall?" I asked. He grinned. "Enough to bury him for 20 years. Maybe more." I nodded. "Good." The screen showed the agents packing up, the SUVs pulling out. Clarissa was led to a car, not cuffed. Not yet. But she wasn't free either. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice small. "Station," the agent said. "We've got questions." The van went quiet as the feeds cut off, the operation wrapping up clean. Rowan pulled out a pack of gum and offered me a piece. I took it, chewing slow, the mint sharp on my tongue. "You okay?" he asked, eyeing me. "Yeah," I said. And I was. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice, about finishing what I'd started. Clarissa didn't know who I was, not after all these years. She'd see soon enough. The van started moving, heading back to base. I looked out the window, the city waking up around us. Phase 1 was done. The dominoes were falling, and I was the one who'd pushed them. The van rumbled back to the warehouse, the city sliding past in a blur of gray buildings and morning traffic. I sat there, headset off now, the screens in front of me dark. Rowan was tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, humming some tune I didn't recognize. The takedown was over, Reed in cuffs, the house torn apart, Clarissa hauled off for questioning. My chest felt tight, but not from nerves. It was something else, something heavier. 3 years of work had just paid off, and yet all I could think about was her face on that feed, confused, scared, crying. She didn't know it was me. Not yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of it. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen, Clarissa. A missed call, then another. Then a text. "What did you do?" All caps, no question mark, like she was yelling through the words. I stared at it for a long minute, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Rowan glanced over. "She's freaking out, huh?" he said, smirking. "Let her sweat," I muttered, shoving the phone back in my pocket. But it buzzed again, another call. I ignored it, watching the warehouse come into view as we pulled into the lot. Inside, the team was already unpacking. Boxes of evidence from the house and office stacked on tables, agents sorting through it all. Director Keller waved me over. "Clean up," he said, his voice gruff but approving. "Valen's done. We've got enough to lock him up for decades." I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. Laptops, files, that burner phone from the safe, all laid out like pieces of a puzzle I'd spent years solving. "What about her?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. Keller shrugged. "She's in holding. Claims she didn't know anything." "We'll see." My phone buzzed again, another text. "Answer me." I pulled it out this time, staring at her words. She was desperate now, probably sitting in some cold room at the station, wondering how her perfect little plan had blown up. I opened the camera roll instead of replying, scrolling to a photo I'd taken months ago during a training drill. Me in full tactical gear, vest, headset, the works, standing next to Rowan, a surveillance monitor in the background. You could just make out Clarissa's face on the screen, a still from one of Reed's calls we'd tapped. I hadn't planned to use it like this, but it felt right. I sent it to her. No words, just the image. Let her figure it out. The phone rang again almost instantly. Her name flashed, insistent. I let it ring twice before picking up, my voice calm. "Yeah." She was breathing hard on the other end, like she'd been running. "What the hell is that picture?" she demanded. "What did you do?" I leaned against the table, watching an agent bag up a stack of Reed's fake invoices. "You said no papers were needed," I told her, keeping it simple. "Guess you were right." She started to say something, her voice rising, but I hung up before she could finish. The line went dead, and I felt a weight lift off me, small but real. Rowan walked over, chewing his gum loud. "She get the memo?" he asked. "She's getting there," I said, tucking the phone away. He laughed, shaking his head. "Man, you're cold." "I like it." I didn't respond. Cold wasn't the word. I wasn't trying to hurt her, not like that. But after 17 years of being invisible to her, of her rolling her eyes at my boring life, I wasn't about to explain myself now. She'd see it all soon enough. Keller called us into a briefing room, a small space with a whiteboard and a few chairs. The screens were back on, showing footage from the house raid looped on mute. "Valen's in processing," he said, pointing at a file. "Singing already, trying to cut a deal." I wasn't surprised. Guys like Reed always folded when the cuffs went on. What's he saying? I asked. Keller flipped open the folder. Claims she knew the wife. Says she was in on the accounts, the gifts. Trying to pin it on her. My jaw tightened. She didn't, I said, firm. She's clueless, not crooked. Keller raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. We'll dig. See what sticks. I thought about that, Clarissa knowing. She didn't. I'd lived with her long enough to be sure. She'd taken Reed's money, sure. The jewelry, the car, the villa she'd bragged about, but she thought it was just him showing off. She wasn't smart enough to hide millions, not careful enough to play that game. But the evidence was there. $140,000 in gifts traced to her name, all tied to Reed's laundering. The villa in Mykonos wasn't a timeshare like she'd told her friends. It was a front. She was in deep, even if she didn't mean to be. My phone buzzed again, another call. I silenced it this time, letting it go to voicemail. I could hear her voice in my head anyway, pleading, yelling, demanding answers. She'd get them, just not from me. Not yet. Keller handed me a coffee, black and bitter, and I took a sip, the heat waking me up. You're off the field for now, he said. Paperwork. Then we regroup. This one's high profile, media's already sniffing. I nodded. Fine by me. I'd done my part. The room emptied out, agents moving to their next tasks. I stayed, staring at the whiteboard where someone had scribbled Reed's name and a list of charges. My marriage was over, had been for a while, I guess, but this was the real end. Clarissa thought she'd unmasked me last night, kicking me out like some loser. Now I was the one peeling back the layers. That photo I'd sent wasn't just a jab. It was the truth, me, the real me, the guy she'd never bothered to see. She'd call again. I knew it. And maybe I'd answer. But for now, I let the silence settle, the coffee cooling in my hand. The game wasn't over. It was just starting. The warehouse was quiet now, the buzz of the morning fading as the team scattered to their next assignments. I sat alone in the briefing room, the whiteboard still staring back at me with Reed's name scrawled in black marker. My coffee was cold, but I sipped it anyway, the bitter taste keeping me sharp. My phone sat on the table, silent for the first time in hours. Clarissa had stopped calling. Maybe she'd given up. Maybe she was too busy freaking out at the station. Either way, I didn't care. Not right then. I leaned back in the chair, my eyes drifting to the stack of files Keller had left behind. Reed's life, my work, all boxed up and ready to bury him. The door creaked open, and Rowan poked his head in. Interrogation starting, he said, chewing that damn gum again. Valen's in room 3. One in. I nodded, pushing myself up. My boots echoed on the concrete as we walked down the hall, past agents hunched over laptops and evidence bags. The interrogation rooms were in the back, small, gray boxes with one-way glass and metal chairs bolted to the floor. I stopped at the window, looking in. Reed was there, cuffed to the table, his fancy suit swapped for a jumpsuit. He looked smaller without the swagger, his hair greasy, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. Agent Torres was already inside, flipping through a file, calm as ever. You've got a lot to say, Reed, he started, his voice steady. Let's hear it. Reed leaned forward, his cuffs clinking. I'll talk, he said, too fast. But you gotta cut me a deal. I'm not the big fish here. Torres didn't flinch. You're the one in cuffs. Start talking and we'll see. Reed swallowed hard, then launched in. It's her, Clarissa. She knew about the accounts. She helped set them up. The jewelry, the car, she pushed for it. Said we needed to look legit. I felt my fists clench at my sides. He was lying, and not even well. Clarissa didn't know a damn thing about laundering. She could barely balance her own checkbook. But Reed kept going, spinning his story. She's got a safe deposit box downtown. Check it. You'll find proof. Torres scribbled something down, then looked up. We'll check. Anything else? Reed nodded, eager now. The villa, she picked it. Said it'd be our getaway. She's in on all of it. I turned away from the glass, my jaw tight. Rowan raised an eyebrow. He's desperate, he said, throwing her under the bus to save his ass. Yeah, I muttered. Won't work. I knew Clarissa wasn't innocent. She'd taken the gifts, flaunted them, let Reed worm his way in. But she wasn't a mastermind. She was just greedy, blind, too caught up in her soulmate to ask where the money came from. The Bureau would figure that out fast. They already had the paper trail, $140,000 in assets tied to her name, all from Reed's dirty cash. Jewelry she wore to parties, a car parked in our garage, that villa she'd bragged about on the phone to her sister. It was enough to drag her in, even if she didn't know the full game. I walked back to the briefing room, needing air. My phone buzzed again, not Clarissa this time, but my lawyer, Mike. I answered, keeping it short. What's up? His voice was all business. She's asking to see you. Clarissa. Called my office from the station, says it's urgent. I rubbed my temple, the headache starting to build. She's in holding? I asked. Yeah, Mike said. Not charged yet, but they're digging. She's scared. Wants to talk. I didn't say anything for a second, just let the words hang there. You don't have to, he added. She's not your problem anymore. He was right. She wasn't. But something in me, maybe the 17 years we'd had, made me nod. Set it up, I said. I'll go. The call ended, and I sat back down, staring at the files. Reed was still in there, flapping his gums, trying to claw his way out. The safe deposit box was a bluff. I bet my truck on it. But the villa was real. We traced it weeks ago. A $2 million property in Mykonos bought through a shell company Reed controlled. Clarissa thought it was a romantic gift, not a laundering front. She'd posted pictures online, all smiles, oblivious. Now it was evidence, and her name was on the deeds. Probation at least, maybe worse. She was in the system now, caught in the net I'd cast for him. An hour later, Mike texted me the details, Bureau conference room, 2 p.m. I spent the time sorting through evidence, double-checking the haul from the house. The burner phone had calls logged to Reed's contacts. The cache was marked with serial numbers we could trace. Solid stuff. By the time I left for the meeting, my head was clear. I drove to the station alone, the city loud around me, horns honking, people rushing. The building was all concrete and glass, cold inside. An agent led me to the room, a beige box with a table and 2 chairs. I sat, waiting. The door opened, and Clarissa walked in. No cuffs, but she looked rough, a hair tangled, eyes red, her robe swapped for jeans and a sweatshirt. She stopped when she saw me, her mouth opening, then closing. Sit, I said, nodding at the chair. She did, slow, like she wasn't sure. They're saying I'm involved, she started, her voice small. I didn't know, I swear. I didn't answer, just watched her. She fidgeted, then leaned forward. You did this, didn't you? The raid, the arrest, it's you. I nodded, just once. Yeah. Her eyes widened, tears welling up. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Who you really are. I leaned back, keeping my voice even. You never asked, I said. You never cared. And that was it, the truth, plain and simple. She stared at me, tears spilling now, but I didn't move. This was her mess. I just lit the fuse. The conference room felt like a freezer, the air heavy with that stale smell of old carpet and cheap coffee. Clarissa sat across from me, her hands twisting together on the table, tears streaking down her face. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the last 24 hours had shrunk her into someone I barely recognized. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? She'd asked, her voice breaking on every word. I'd answered her straight. You never asked. You never cared. It wasn't mean, just true. 17 years, and she'd never once pushed past the surface, never wondered why I was gone so much or what I did behind that locked office door. Now here we were, staring at each other across a table in a bureau building, the life we'd built in pieces. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, sniffling loud. I cared, she said, but it sounded weak, like she didn't believe it herself. I didn't know it was this. FBI? Raids? You were supposed to be an accountant. Her voice rose at the end, almost a yell, like she was mad I'd tricked her. I didn't flinch. I told you I worked for the government, I said, keeping it calm. You filled in the rest. Didn't want to hear more? She shook her head fast, like she could shake off the truth. That's not fair, she muttered. You hid it. You lied. I leaned forward then, just a little, my hands flat on the table. I didn't lie, I said. I protected you. Kept you out of it. Until you let him in. Her face crumpled at that. Reed's name didn't even need saying. She knew who I meant. I didn't know what he was, she whispered, staring down at her hands. He was nice to me. He listened. You were always distant. Distant. The word hit me, but not hard. She wasn't wrong. I'd been gone a lot, late nights, trips I couldn't explain, walls I had to put up to keep my work separate. But I'd tried. I'd fixed the house, paid the bills, sat through her endless stories about her friends. She just stopped seeing it. Stopped seeing me. You wanted a soulmate, I said, my voice steady. You got one. She started crying harder then, big sobs that shook her shoulders. I didn't mean for this, she said between gasps. The money, the stuff, I thought it was just gifts. I didn't know it was illegal. I believed her. Mostly. Clarissa wasn't smart enough to run a laundering scheme. She'd fail a math test before she could hide millions. But she'd taken it all anyway. The jewelry, the car, that villa she'd bragged about. Greed made her blind, not brains. They're saying I could go to jail, she went on, looking up at me with wet, desperate eyes. You have to help me. Please. I didn't move, didn't soften. I can't, I said. Simple as that. You're in it now. They've got evidence, your name on accounts, property. You took his money. She shook her head again, frantic. But I didn't know. You know I didn't. Tell them. Her voice was loud now, echoing off the beige walls. I stayed quiet for a second, letting her words hang there. Then I said, they'll figure it out. If you're clean, you'll walk. If not, I trailed off, shrugging. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. You're not even going to try? She asked, her voice small again. After everything? Everything. 17 years of dinners, fights, quiet mornings. The time she laughed at my bad cooking, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch. It flashed through my head, quick and sharp, but it didn't change anything. You told me to leave, I said, meeting her eyes. No papers needed. I did what you wanted. She flinched, like the words cut her. Maybe they did. I didn't mean it like this, she mumbled, tears dripping onto the table. I was mad. I was stupid. I didn't think. She stopped, choking on a sob. I didn't fill the silence. There was nothing to say. The door opened then, and an agent stepped in, young guy, buzz cut, clipboard in hand. Time's up, he said, glancing at me. She's due back and holding. Clarissa looked at him, then at me, panic flaring in her eyes. Wait, she said, reaching across the table toward me. Her fingers brushed mine, cold and shaky. Please, don't let them take me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I pulled my hand back, slow but firm. I can't fix this, I told her. You made your choices. The agent stepped closer, motioning for her to stand. She did, wobbly, her face a mess of tears and mascara. As he let her out, she turned back one last time. I didn't know you, she said, her voice breaking. I should have. I didn't. The door shut behind her, and the room went quiet again. I sat there, staring at the empty chair, her words rattling around in my head. She didn't know me. She was right. But I'd known her. Every laugh, every sigh, every time she looked past me like I wasn't there. 17 years, and she'd never seen me clear until now, when it was too late. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. The agent at the door nodded at me, and I walked out, the hallway cold and gray. My phone buzzed. Mike again. She's a wreck. You good? I texted back a quick, yeah. And I was. Not happy, not sad, just done. Clarissa wanted forgiveness, a lifeline, but I didn't have it to give. Not out of spite, just truth. She'd built this mess with Reed, brick by brick, and I'd torn it down. Now she'd face it. I headed back to the warehouse, the weight of her tears still on me, but lighter than before. She saw me now. Too bad it took this to make it happen. I left the station and drove back to the warehouse, the city humming around me as the afternoon sun climbed higher. The air in the truck was warm, the heater rattling like it always did, but I kept the window cracked anyway, letting the breeze cut through. My hands were steady on the wheel, my mind replaying that meeting with Clarissa, her tears, her shaky voice, the way she'd reach for me like I could pull her out of the hole she'd dug. I'm sorry, she'd said, over and over, like it could undo everything. It couldn't. I didn't feel bad about that, not really. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. Me? I was just the guy who'd flipped the lights on. Back at the warehouse, the team was still sorting through evidence, the tables piled high with boxes and bags. Rowan waved me over, his gum snapping loud. Valen's sentencing set, he said, handing me a folder. Court pushed it through fast, 22 years. Racketeering, fraud, conspiracy. Done deal. I flipped it open, scanning the pages. Reed had tried to bargain, pointing fingers at Clarissa and anyone else he could think of, but the evidence was too strong, my evidence. Bank records, tapped calls, witnesses who'd flipped. 3 years of my life, wrapped up in a judge's gavel. Good, I said, closing the folder. He's out. What about her? Rowan asked, leaning against the table. I shrew. 3 years, plus some financial ethics class they're making her take. No jail. He whistled low. Lucky break. Thought she'd get more with all that cash tied to her. I nodded, but didn't say much. The $140,000 in gifts, the jewelry, the car, the villa had her name all over it. But the Bureau knew she wasn't the brains. Just the fool who'd taken the bait. 3 years of probation was light, considering. She dodged the worst, but her life was still wrecked. The media had already latched on, TVs in the warehouse were muted, but I could see the headlines flashing. Wife of undercover FBI agent caught in high-profile takedown. My name was in there too, though I'd told them no interviews. Reporters had been calling all day, leaving voicemails I deleted without listening. I didn't need the spotlight. Never did. Watching Reed get hauled off and Clarissa's world crumble was enough. Justice didn't need a camera crew. I grabbed a water from the fridge and sat down, letting the noise of the room fade into the background. Keller walked over, his glasses perched on his nose. "Press is eating this up," he said, nodding at the screens. "You sure you don't want to say something? Looks good for the Bureau." I shook my head. "Let them run their stories. I'm done talking." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Fair enough. You've earned that." He dropped a new file on the table, thicker than Reed's. "Next case," he said. "Whenever you're ready." I didn't open it, just tapped it with my finger. "Soon," I said. He walked off, leaving me with the hum of the warehouse in my thoughts. Clarissa's face kept popping up in my head, not the crying wreck from the conference room, but the way she looked last night, laughing as she told me to leave. No divorce papers needed, she'd said, so sure she'd won. Now she was on probation, her boyfriend locked up, her name plastered across every news channel. The house was gone too, seized by the feds, set to be auctioned off with the villa and everything else Reed had touched. She'd moved in with her sister, last I heard. No more fancy cars, no more trips. Just a small apartment and a court-ordered class on how not to be a fool with money. I stood up, stretching my legs, and walked over to the evidence tables. The stuff from the house was there, my old laptop, the safe's contents, even a photo frame I'd hung in the hall. Me and Clarissa at the beach, smiling like we meant it. I picked it up, running my thumb over the glass. That was a long time ago, back when she still looked at me like I mattered. I set it back down, face first, and turned away. No point in holding on to it. The past was done, and I wasn't the type to dwell. My phone buzzed. "Mike, my lawyer. Press keeps calling. You sure no comment?" I texted back. "Sure. Let it die down." He replied with a thumbs up, and I pocketed the phone. The warehouse was slowing down now, agents heading out, the day winding to a close. Rowan came over again, tossing his gum wrapper in the trash. "Beer?" he asked. "Team's hitting the bar later. Celebrate." I thought about it. Cold bottle, loud laughs, a chance to shake this off. "Yeah," I said. "I'm in." We left the warehouse as the sun dipped low, the sky turning orange over the city. The bar was a dive a few blocks away, all sticky floors and neon signs. The team was already there. Torres, a couple others, Keller even showed up for a round. They raised their glasses when I walked in, cheering like I'd won something big. To the man who took down Valen. Rowan yelled, and I let myself smile, just a little. The beer was cold, the chatter loud, and for the first time in months, I felt light. No more hiding, no more pretending. Reed was gone, Clarissa was out, and I was still standing. The night stretched on, the bar emptying out slow. I stayed until last call, nursing a second beer, watching the team laugh and swap stories. This was my life now, work, purpose, people who got it. Clarissa had her sentencing, her probation, her sister's couch. I had this, and it was enough. I paid my tab, stepped outside, and breathed in the cool night air. The headlines would fade, the calls would stop. Tomorrow, I'd open that new file. Tonight, I just walked home, the city quiet around me, feeling like myself again. The morning after the bar, I woke up in my new apartment, a small place downtown, all bare walls and unpacked boxes. The bed was just a mattress on the floor, but it was mine, no traces of Clarissa or the life we'd had. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, hitting my eyes, and I groaned, rolling over to check my phone. It was 7:30 a.m., later than I'd meant to sleep. A text from Rowan sat unread. "Good night, huh?" Team's still buzzing. I smirked, tossing the phone aside. Last night had been loud, beers, laughs, the team treating me like some hero. It felt good, but now it was back to reality. I got up, my joints stiff from the mattress, and shuffled to the kitchen. The coffee maker was still in a box somewhere, so I boiled water in a pot and dumped in some instant grounds. It tasted like dirt, but it did the job. I leaned against the counter, sipping slow, staring out the window at the city waking up. Cars honked below, people rushed along the sidewalks. My old life, the house, Clarissa, the pretending was gone. The feds had seized it all, The house sold at auction. The villa in Mykonos, too. Last I heard, the money went as some victim fund. Didn't matter to me. I didn't want it back. My phone buzzed again, Keller this time. Office, 9 o'clock. Promotions official. I set the mug down, a small grin tugging at my lips. Head of covert financial crimes. After the Reed takedown, they'd pushed it through fast. More responsibility, more cases, a bigger desk. I'd earned it, sure, but it still felt strange. 17 years of hiding who I was, and now I was stepping up, out in the open. Well, as open as this job got. I showered quick, the water lukewarm, and pulled on a clean shirt and jeans. No suit today, just a meeting, no field work. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The bureau office was a 20-minute drive, all glass and steel, humming with quiet energy. I parked in the garage, nodding at the guard who waved me through. Inside, the place smelled like paper and disinfectant, same as always. Keller was waiting in his office, a corner room with a view of the skyline. Sit, he said, pointing at a chair. I did, and he slid a badge across the desk, my name, new title etched below it. Head of covert, he said, leaning back. You're running the show now. Pick your team, set your cases. Budget's yours too. I picked up the badge, the weight of it solid in my hand. Thanks, I said, meaning it. He nodded, no fuss. Don't screw it up. The team threw a small celebration later, coffee and donuts in the break room, a few claps on the back. Rowan grinned, holding up a cruller. To the boss, he said, and the others laughed. Torres was there, a couple new faces too. They'd all heard about Reed, the raid, the headlines. You're a legend now, one of the rookies said, half joking. I shrugged it off. Just did the job, I told him, grabbing a donut. But inside, it hit me, this was respect, real and earned. Not the quiet nods I'd gotten as Clarissa's husband, the guy who fixed the sink and mowed the lawn. This was different. After the break room cleared out, I settled into my new office, bigger than my old cubicle, with a window and a desk that didn't wobble. The file Keller had given me yesterday was there, waiting. I opened it, flipping through pages of a new target, some crypto scammer out west, early stages of a case. It felt good to have something fresh, something mine. I started jotting notes, my pen scratching against the paper, the rhythm familiar. This was my life now, work, purpose, a clear path. No more late-night fights with Clarissa, no more pretending I was less than I was. My phone buzzed again as I worked, Clarissa's name this time. I hesitated, thumb over the screen. It had been days since the conference room, since her tears and apologies. I'd heard she'd moved in with her sister, a cramped place across town. Probation had started, her name still popping up in the news now and then. I opened the message. Can we talk? Please. I need to say something. I stared at it, the words simple but heavy. Part of me wanted to delete it, let it fade like the rest. But another part, the part that remembered 17 years, made me pause. I didn't reply, just set the phone face down and went back to the file. The day stretched on meetings, paperwork, a quick lunch from the vending machine. By evening, the office was quiet, just me and the hum of the lights. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline, all lit up in the dusk. The promotion, the team, the new case, it was a life I hadn't pictured a year ago, stuck in that house with a wife who didn't see me. Now I was here, building something real. Clarissa's text nagged at me, though. I picked up the phone again, reading it once more. I need to say something. What was left? She'd said plenty, sorry, scared, shocked. I'd heard it all. I deleted the message, my fingers steady as I hit the button. No reply, no call back. She'd made her choices, Reed, the money, kicking me out. I'd made mine too, walking away, tearing it all down, starting over. The trash can icon blinked, then faded. Done. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and locked the office door behind me. The hallway was empty, my steps echoing as I headed to the garage. Outside, the air was cool, the city alive with noise. My truck started with a sputter, and I drove home, the skyline shrinking in the rear view. This was aftermath, hers in ruins, mine rising. And I was good with that. The new office felt like a fresh start, all clean lines and quiet corners, a far cry from the cluttered cubicle I'd hunched in for years. It was Monday morning, a week after the promotion, and I walked in with a coffee from the shop downstairs, real stuff, not the instant junk I'd been choking down at the apartment. The view from my window stretched across the city, the skyline sharp against a pale blue sky. My desk was already piled with papers, that crypto scammer case staring up at me from an open folder. I set the coffee down, hung my jacket on the chair, and got to work. This was it, the real goodbye to everything I'd left behind. I flipped through the file, my pen scratching notes as I went. The target was some slick guy out of California, moving dirty cash through fake NFT sales, millions washing in and out like tidewater. It was early days, just leads and hunches, but it felt good to dig in. My phone stayed quiet, no buzz from Clarissa or anyone else. Deleting her last message had closed that door for good, and I didn't miss the weight of it. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 a.m., the office waking up around me, phones ringing, footsteps in the hall. Rowan poked his head in, grinning. "Boss man settled," he said, tossing a stress ball my way. I caught it, tossed it back. "Getting there," I said. He lingered, leaning on the doorframe. "Team's ready when you are." "That's some new blood itching to chase this crypto clown." I nodded, tapping the file. "Briefing at 10. Bring coffee." He laughed, saluting as he left. I like this, running the show, picking the plays. It wasn't about power, just purpose. For years, I'd been the guy in the shadows, tracking Reed, hiding who I was from Clarissa. Now I was out front, no more masks. I sipped the coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and kept reading. The case was messy: shell companies, encrypted wallets, but I'd cracked worse. Reed was proof of that. Mid-morning, the team filed in Rowan, Torres, two rookies with eager eyes. I stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, laying it out. "Target's name is Ethan Bryce," I started, writing it big. 34, lives in LA. Runs a front called Bryce Digital Arts. We've got him tied to $8 million in suspect transfers, but it's deeper. I want eyes on his accounts, his contacts, his habits. They nodded, taking notes, the room buzzing with focus. Rowan smirked. "Another read, huh?" I shook my head. "Smarter. Quieter. We move slow, build it tight." The briefing stretched an hour, questions flying, plans forming. By the end, I felt that old fire kicking in, sharp, steady, alive. Lunch was a sandwich at my desk, crumbs falling on the file as I cross-checked leads. The afternoon blurred into calls and emails, pulling strings to get warrants, tapping sources for dirt on Bryce. It was steady work, the kind that kept my head clear. No room for Clarissa's voice, her tears, her "I'm sorry" echoing back. She was gone, probation, her sister's couch, a life I didn't fit in anymore. The house was sold, the villa too, all traces of us wiped clean. I didn't check the news much, but I knew the headlines had faded. Wife of undercover agent was old gossip now. Good. Around 5 p.m., I leaned back, stretching my neck. The office was emptying out, the hum of the day winding down. I grabbed my coffee mug, empty now, and walked to the break room to rinse it. Torres was there, fiddling with the vending machine. "Good first day, boss?" he asked, kicking the thing until a candy bar dropped. "Yeah," I said, running water over the mug. "Solid start." He nodded, ripping open the wrapper. Heard Valen's appealing. "Won't stick, though." I shrugged, drying my hands. "Let him try?" "He's done." Torres grinned, heading out, and I stood there a minute, the sink dripping behind me. Reed could appeal all he wanted. 22 years wasn't budging. My work was ironclad. Back in the office, I packed up, file in my bag, jacket on, lights off. The city glowed outside, all orange and gold as the sun dipped low. I locked the door and took the stairs down, the echo of my steps filling the quiet. In the garage, my truck waited, same old sputter as I started it. The drive home was smooth, traffic thinning out, the radio playing some song I didn't know. My apartment was dark when I got in, just the hum of the fridge greeting me. I dropped my bag, kicked off my boots, and poured a glass of water. No beer tonight, just calm. I stood by the window, looking out at the street below. People walked dogs, cars rolled by, life kept moving. Clarissa's words from months ago floated up, no divorce papers needed. Just leave. I had. Left the house. The lies, the man she'd boxed me into. She'd laughed then, thinking she'd won, but I'd walked away with more than she'd ever know. Dignity, purpose, a life that fit. The warrant I'd served wasn't just for Reed. It was for me too, cutting free the weight of her disrespect. I didn't need a lawyer to sign it off. I'd done it myself. The glass was cool in my hand as I took a sip, the city lights flickering outside. The crypto case sat in my bag, a new beginning waiting. Another con man, another chase, another chance to do what I was good at. I smiled, small but real, and set the glass down. The mattress wasn't much, but it'd do. I lay back, arms behind my head, the ceiling blank above me. No ghosts here, just me, the job, the road ahead. Clarissa had her goodbye, messy and loud. This was mine, quiet and sure. And it felt right. The call came just after lunch, right as I was staring out of the 20th floor window of Echelon Global's Midtown office, watching the world churn beneath me. The traffic, the people, the ceaseless motion of a city that never stops to consider who just lost their footing. I thought it might be Brielle checking in about dinner plans or maybe dropping a hint about where she wanted to go for our anniversary, some new place with sculpted plates and 12-course menus that charged extra for air. But when I answered, I heard it in her voice before she even spoke. The smirk. "We're downsizing," she said, sharp and breezy, like she was commenting on the weather. "Today's your last day, unless you want to stay on as janitor. Floors need mopping." Behind her, I heard Myra's unmistakable cackle. Cold. Cruel. Loud enough that she wanted me to hear. That meant it wasn't just business. It was personal. My wife's sister had hated me since the day I stopped paying for her Pilates classes and called her out for borrowing one of Brielle's business cards to expense a vacation. She was the type who smiled at funerals, mostly to check out who was grieving harder than her. I stared at the skyline, forcing my voice to stay even. "Thanks for the amazing offer." Brielle laughed like she'd won something. And maybe she thought she had. In her mind, it was probably some final blow. After all, she was the queen now. CEO of a global firm, wearing tailored power suits and clinking glasses with venture capitalists who didn't care what lives they steamrolled. She had the title, the spotlight, the nameplate on the mahogany door, and apparently enough pettiness to fire her own husband like an intern with poor hygiene. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the fallback plan I'd been nurturing like a quiet ember in the back of my mind for months. She didn't know about the private studio apartment I kept across town, the one where I did my real work, the kind of work Echelon ran on, the kind of work she paraded around as hers in board meetings. She didn't know that while she was busy stepping over people to pose for glossy magazine interviews, I was building something no publicist could spin, no press release could capture. And she sure as hell didn't know that the reason she could even hold her head high in those shareholder meetings was because of the predictive analytics engine I'd coded, refined, and perfected. An engine that was never formally transferred to Echelon in any signed document. It lived in their systems, but it had my fingerprint all over it. And now? I was the only one who could truly navigate its core without capsizing the entire ship. "I wouldn't bother coming home either," Brielle added casually. "We've changed the locks." Myra said it was time. She didn't hang up immediately. She waited. Like she wanted to hear me crack, to scream or beg or lash out with the kind of desperation that would prove her superiority. But I didn't give her that. I never had. That was part of what made her hate me toward the end. I didn't need her money, and that was an unforgivable crime in Brielle's world. So I simply said, "You've made yourself very clear," and hung up. I sat there for a moment longer, breathing through the silence that followed. The office around me was quiet. Too quiet. As if the building had been instructed to shun me in real time. The digital clock on the corner of my desk kept blinking 12:53. My hands were still on the phone. But inside, something had shifted. I stood up and looked around. The desk I'd once cherished was now just another hollow space with a surface littered with memos, deadlines, and empty coffee cups that symbolized wasted hours. A framed photo of us, Brielle and me, smiling at Lake Como 2 years ago, sat near my monitor. I picked it up, held it for half a second, and then flipped it face down. Let them think they'd humiliated me. The truth? They'd just opened the gate. I took one last glance around my office. No speeches. No long email goodbyes. I didn't need to broadcast what I already knew. The version of me they thought they were firing wasn't the man who was walking out of here. The real me had been sitting dormant, quiet in the corners, waiting. And now, he was wide awake. I slid my phone into my coat pocket, picked up my laptop, and opened one specific folder, one that only I could access with a biometric key I'd coded myself. A heartbeat sensor tied to my Apple Watch, a redundancy system that bypassed firewalls, and a self-erasing algorithm if anyone but me touched it. I smiled at the screen. It still worked. Then I deleted it. The curse script. The untraceable, original kernel of the analytics system that powered every major decision Echelon made. The framework still existed on their servers, but without this piece, it would slowly become inaccurate, then unreliable, then useless. A digital time bomb. It wouldn't explode immediately. It would unravel. A 0.25% missed here, a projected growth curve that didn't match results, a partner who lost confidence after one too many wrong data points. No one would know exactly what went wrong, but I would. I closed the laptop, slid it into its sleeve, and picked up the only other thing I cared about in the room. A small, leather-bound notebook tucked inside a locked drawer. My notes. My plans. My freedom. As I walked down the hallway, no one looked at me. The receptionist averted her eyes. The HR manager I used to help prep presentations suddenly found her phone very interesting. But one person did meet my gaze. Damon, a junior analyst I'd mentored since his first internship. He stood at the corner, eyes wide, confusion and sadness written all over his face. I gave him a small nod. He nodded back. That was enough. In the elevator, I finally exhaled. I was free. And Brielle? She thought she'd played the final card. But the game had only just begun. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss, and I stepped into the marble-floored lobby of Echelon Global for what would be the last time. Not that anyone would have guessed. I wasn't dragging a box of personal effects. I wasn't red-faced or weeping into my tie. No storming. No dramatic outburst. Just a quiet walk toward the end of something I had helped build with my bare hands and better intentions. The silence in that lobby was a language of its own. Subtle, suffocating. The receptionist, Marcy, looked up from her desk. Her hand hovered mid-air over the keyboard, then quickly dropped as if she hadn't seen me, as if ignoring me might undo the moment. I didn't blame her. She was just another foot soldier trying not to step on landmines. Word must have traveled fast, eh? Brielle's empire was efficient like that. She didn't just fire people. She erased them. Clean breaks, no fingerprints. I'm sure by now, the official story was that I'd stepped down to pursue creative interests. I could practically hear her PR team polishing the statement. I took my time walking past the glass panels that lined the hallway. Through them, I saw bits and pieces of a world I once cared about. Rooms where I'd brainstormed late into the night, crunched numbers that no one else could decode, and coded entire systems that had become the lifeblood of the company. People looked up from their desks curious. I saw a few stiffen. A few ducked their heads. One or two offered tentative nods. There was no spoken farewell. But I saw something else in their eyes. Not pity, no. Something more rattling. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what this meant. If I could be discarded, someone who'd once shared the corner office with the queen herself, what did that say about their own security? Their own worth? I didn't slow down. I turned right into the elevator vestibule, past the break room, where someone had left behind half a donut on a paper towel. Strange what your brain picks up when everything's ending. I pressed the button and waited, hearing the soft whirring of cables behind the walls. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, then hesitant. I didn't turn around until a voice spoke. Mason. I turned. Damon. The junior analyst I'd mentored. Smart. Observant. Loyal in a way I hadn't expected anyone to be in that building anymore. His tie was slightly askew, and his brow was creased with concern. I just heard, he said. Is it true? I offered a small smile. Define true. He looked stunned for a moment. You're really leaving? I was invited to mop floors, I said dryly. But I declined the promotion. He laughed nervously, not sure if it was a joke or not. He stepped closer, voice lowered. This doesn't feel right. You are Echelon. Everyone knows that, even if they won't say it out loud. I'm not Echelon, I said quietly. Not anymore. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. I stepped inside, then turned to him as he hovered, unsure whether to follow or stay behind. I could see it in his eyes, questions he wanted to ask but didn't have the courage to voice. Not yet. If I were you, I said gently, I'd start polishing my resume. Sooner rather than later. He nodded once. It wasn't just gratitude. It was understanding. The doors closed. Down I went, each floor a small exhale, a memory passing. The late-night pizza sessions. The strategic planning meetings that turned into marital arguments behind closed doors. The celebratory drinks after quarterly wins, where Brielle toasted the team and I smiled quietly, knowing the engine behind the numbers was sitting in my hard drive. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, I had shed every layer of pride I'd once tied to that place. My nameplate was already gone, my keycard disabled. But I didn't feel powerless. I felt lighter. Outside, the city hadn't changed. The sidewalks still pulsed with urgency. Horns blared. Tourists snapped photos near the fountains. I stood on the curb with my laptop case slung over my shoulder and my coat collar turned up against the early wind. I didn't call a car. I walked. Not aimlessly, deliberately. 8 blocks later, I reached the Echelon Data Center. A nondescript building wrapped in slate gray panels and obscured behind code-locked doors. I still had one last credential, an analog one. The security guard, an older man named Lester who'd once shared stories about his daughter's softball games, looked up from his newspaper. "Hey, Mr. Mason. Didn't know you were stopping by today?" "Just grabbing a few old backups," I said with an easy grin. He shrugged and buzzed me through. Inside the server room, I moved quickly. No hesitation. I went straight to Terminal C. An old console only a few of us ever used. I plugged in my encrypted flash drive, bypassed the front-facing protocols, and navigated to a buried data cache. Not just files, architecture. Frameworks. Logs that told stories Brielle never even knew were being written. I didn't take them. I didn't need to. I simply deleted one very specific decryption script, a private key that validated thousands of real-time transactions between Echelon and its AI recommendation engine. It would take them weeks to realize what was wrong. By then, clients would start losing trust. Decision metrics would start faltering. And it would all trace back to a ghost script, one I had just erased. I removed the flash drive, wiped the terminal's cache, and left. Outside, the clouds had thickened. A light drizzle kissed the top of my head. I didn't rush. I took the subway downtown, to the studio apartment Brielle never knew existed. A 400-square-foot space tucked above a bookstore, with peeling paint and bad insulation, but privacy no one could touch. Inside, I took off my coat, dropped my bag, and opened a drawer in the corner desk. There it was. The black notebook. Not a journal. Not memories. Blueprints. Plans. Codes. Names. Concepts. It was the foundation of everything I never shared, never trusted anyone with, not even Brielle. Especially not her. I sat down, flipped to the last page I'd written on, and picked up the pen that had been waiting for this moment. They thought they'd humiliated me. Truth was, they'd set me free. The studio apartment was nothing special to anyone else, a narrow room tucked above a bookstore, with creaky floorboards, chipped molding, and a radiator that hissed like it was in constant protest. But to me, it was sanctuary. Freedom. The one place left that was mine and mine alone. No keycard access, no security cameras, no boardroom eyes tracking my every move. Brielle had never stepped foot here. Hell, she didn't even know it existed, which made it the most valuable real estate I had. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my coat over the sagging arm of a worn leather chair, and walked to the desk in the corner, the one that looked like it belonged in a hacker's lair more than an ex-executive's safe house. I slid open the bottom drawer, fingers brushing past a stack of prepaid SIM cards and USB drives until they landed on the black notebook. It wasn't labeled. No names. No logos. Just matte leather and thread binding worn from constant flipping. This notebook wasn't just a backup. It was the real master key. My insurance. I opened it slowly, like a ritual, and the pages bloomed with diagrams, equations, and notes scrawled in tiny, precise handwriting. Charts mapping Echelon's core algorithms. Frameworks I'd coded by hand over the last 5 years. Adjustments no one else could even begin to interpret. Every line of logic, every predictive model that powered their proprietary engine, they all started here. With me. Brielle never asked how the engine worked. Never asked about rights or authorship. Why would she? I was her husband. The man in the shadows who made the magic happen so she could take center stage. She'd been too busy dressing up our story for investors to worry about the fine print. The irony was poetic. She built a fortress on sand and never once stopped to test the ground beneath her heels. And now, I had a choice. I could destroy Echelon from the outside with a single coordinated leak. A few emails, a handful of internal documents, and a demo of how unstable their projections were without my code would be enough to trigger an internal audit and a public relations disaster. But that wasn't what I wanted. Revenge wasn't the point. Not really. I wanted to build something better. I flipped to the tab section marked Nova. That was the code name I'd given to the project, the one I'd been sketching out in the stolen hours between midnight and dawn, long before Brielle ever picked up her first investor. Nova wasn't just another analytics tool. It was the next generation. A self-learning, ethics-compliant intelligence engine that adjusted its projections based not only on market behavior, but on sentiment, socioeconomic variance, and individual context. Something more human. I ran a hand through my hair and pulled my laptop onto the desk. No echelon servers. No dependencies. This system lived locally. I powered it up and watched the Nova interface bloom across the screen. Smooth, clean, elegant. The login screen pulsed gently. I tapped in my credentials and was greeted with a quiet chime. "Welcome back, Mason." 3 new messages blinked in the corner of the dashboard. I clicked through them. The first was from a hedge fund in Singapore that had heard whispers about a new black box product being quietly tested among independent VCs. The second was a meeting request from an executive at Hyperion DataWorks, a former Echelon client I suspected would be very interested in what Nova could offer. And the third was from someone unexpected. Alton Morrow, CEO of Luminar Ventures. A man who'd once called me a quiet genius during a panel discussion on the future of AI in business. He was one of the few people who saw me, not just the public version of me Brielle used like a trophy husband, but the actual thinker behind the curtain. The message was simple. Heard what happened. If you're ready to build, we should talk. Coffee? My office. No suits, no games. You pick the day. I stared at the message for a long moment, then opened a tab and looked at the calendar. This wasn't luck. It was alignment. A signal that the path I'd drawn wasn't a fantasy. It was real. Achievable. I stood and walked to the window. The city stretched before me, sprawling and indifferent, lit up like a living organism. Somewhere in that maze of steel and light, Brielle was probably sipping champagne with Myra, celebrating their little coup. Maybe she thought I was crying in a hotel lobby or begging some attorney for a bridge loan. Let her think that. I sipped cold coffee left from earlier that morning and returned to my desk. I started assembling a folder. Not just code vision. A roadmap. What Nova could do, what it would cost, who it could serve, and how it would redefine what data intelligence meant in the next 5 years. This wasn't just about proving I could survive without her. It was about proving I was always the one driving the engine. By midnight, the outline was complete. I packaged the folder into an encrypted file and set up a meeting invite for Alton Morrow Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. No suits, no games, just 2 people who understood the battlefield. I stared at the invite for a moment before hitting send. Then I leaned back, arms behind my head, letting the tension ease out of my spine. The world had shifted, but I hadn't collapsed under it. In fact, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not because I had a team behind me or a corporation cushioning my fall, but because I had clarity. Brielle thought she'd cut me off from everything that mattered. What she'd really done was hand me the match while standing in a house of paper. The real work began now. And this time, the empire I built wouldn't have her name anywhere near it. Alton Morrow didn't do small talk. That was the first thing anyone in the tech space learned when they crossed his path. He was blunt, unfiltered, and terrifyingly intelligent. The kind of man who made power moves in jeans and loafers, who could glance at a dashboard and know which direction the market would lurch 3 quarters from now. If Brielle was the queen of flash and posturing, Alton was the architect of substance. That's why I picked him. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't send an email. I just showed up. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Kyla, raised an eyebrow when I walked into the glass-paneled reception area of Luminar Ventures, holding nothing but a black thumb drive in my palm and a look that said I wasn't here to beg. She looked me over, then picked up her phone and whispered something. A beat later, she nodded once and pointed down the hall. He said clear his schedule. Go on in. Alton's office wasn't showy. No marble. No abstract art hung, just to impress. Just a long window view of the skyline and a single desk, steel, clean, precise. The man himself was leaning against the window frame, sleeves rolled up, a ceramic mug in one hand, and a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. I figured you'd come eventually, he said, voice low and cool. Didn't think it'd be this soon. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and held up the thumb drive like an offering. I've got something to show you. No strings. Just facts. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Then show me. I plugged in the drive, opened the encrypted folder, and let Nova speak for itself. First, the framework, an interface that visualized behavior patterns not just by raw data points, but by emotional resonance, socio-political context, and trust weighting. Then the model's self-correcting engine, coded to recognize its own blind spots and retrain in real time without human prompt. Finally, the projection module, how Nova could forecast market shifts not just based on metrics, but by anticipating human decision patterns days, even weeks, ahead. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just watched, eyes sharp and unwavering. When the final module closed, he leaned back and whistled. "You built this." "Every line of code," I said. "And you're telling me this didn't come from Echelon?" "I never signed over IP rights," I replied. "Everything they use is a shadow of this. A half-baked version built off my early drafts." He tilted his head. "And Brielle? She doesn't know." "She thinks she burned the bridge," I said. "But she forgot I built the river first." He let that hang in the air for a long moment. Then he smiled, just enough to show teeth. "You could break them." I met his gaze. "I could build something better." He nodded slowly. "Now that's a better game." Alton stood and circled around the desk, hands in his pockets. "You know, when I first met you, you were the guy standing behind her at those expos, adjusting her mic, watching the screens. Quiet, polite. She called you her support system. Said you were brilliant, but not business-minded. She never minded my mind when it paid for her first office lease." I said, voice calm. Alton chuckled. "Well, she's about to learn the hard way what happens when the support system goes solo." He sat on the edge of the desk. "Let's talk about rollout. About funding. I've got a team of engineers who can work in a blackout zone. A legal department that can draw circles around her before she even gets out of bed. And I've got capital, Mason. Real capital." I nodded. "I want autonomy. No shadow control. I'm not handing over another brainchild to someone else's ego." "You won't," he said. "You'll be the face this time. And the hands. And the spine." I exhaled slowly. "Then we move now." We talked for 2 more hours. About strategy, about deployment, about how to build something that wasn't just a reaction to Echelon, but a complete paradigm shift. Not a clone. Not a copy. A challenger. One rooted in everything Echelon had lost. Real trust, real transparency, real ingenuity. By the time I left his office, the sun had dipped below the skyline. The city was shifting into its twilight rhythm, but I walked differently now. No longer as the discarded husband Brielle thought she'd exiled, but as the man who had built the bones of an empire and was now drafting something stronger from scratch. Outside the building, I paused under a flickering street lamp, the air sharp with the smell of rain and ambition. I pulled out my phone and opened an old folder of Echelon press clippings, photos of Brielle at launches, and panel discussions, in luxury hotels giving statements about innovation and legacy. Always her name. Always her smile. My fingerprints hidden behind the velvet curtain. Not anymore. I tapped the screen and started a new document. A list of names. Engineers, analysts, strategists. People I had mentored, collaborated with, or quietly supported behind the scenes, many of them now disillusioned or outright discarded by Echelon. The cast-offs. The ignored. The ones who built the foundation but were never invited to the top floor. They'd be the first ones I called. They knew the truth. And they were hungry to build again with someone who saw them. I walked 2 blocks to a late-night diner, ordered coffee, and opened my laptop right there under the buzz of cheap lights and old vinyl booths. The Nova framework was already humming. I pulled up a new interface and began outlining what we'd need for Phase 1. Server load testing. Private beta clients. Legal architecture for ownership and release rights. I didn't need to destroy Brielle to win. All I had to do was give people something real to believe in. Something she could never offer. Something I'd always held in my hands. It was easy to forget how many people Brielle had discarded on her way up. She wore ambition like armor, sharp and shining, and she didn't mind stepping over bodies to get to the next stage. But the thing about discarded people is, they remember. They talk. And when someone finally shows up with a different kind of plan, one that doesn't involve egos and power plays but respect and opportunity, they show up too. My mornings started early now. No corporate commute, no tailored suits or sterile boardrooms. Just black coffee, a plain t-shirt, and a whiteboard already littered with diagrams and timelines before the sun fully rose. The studio apartment transformed overnight into a nerve center. Cables snaked across the floor, laptops hummed with simulations, and empty takeout boxes were stacked like trophies. It was messy. It was human. It was real. And it was working. Within days of my meeting with Alton, things began to move. Not in the flashy, PR-heavy way Echelon liked to operate, but in a way that had weight. Quiet meetings in co-working spaces. Midnight video calls with engineers in Berlin, Toronto, Sao Paulo. People I had once worked beside in the trenches, now eager to join a movement instead of a machine. They were tired of being cogs. I gave them keys. Nova was no longer just a concept. It was breathing, learning, iterating. Every day we added new layers. A modular trust algorithm. A consumer-side transparency panel that would let clients see exactly how their data was used. No more black box. No more guesswork. If Echelon was flash and illusion, Nova would be fire and glass, bright, hot, and impossible to fake. But building the engine was only one part of it. I needed people, not just programmers and coders, but storytellers, strategists, people who could see past the numbers and understand what Nova meant for the world. That's when I called Marin. She had once been Echelon's lead UX designer, until Brielle sidelined her in a reorg that replaced talent with trend chasers. Marin had an instinct for experience, a sixth sense for what users needed before they could articulate it. I sent her a simple message: let me show you something worth believing in. She replied with 3 words: send the address. When she arrived, her eyes scanned the chaos of my apartment turn lab, and instead of flinching, she grinned. Looks like you're actually doing it. I nodded. Want to help build something better? Marin rolled up her sleeves and joined without a second question. One by one, they came. People Brielle had pushed aside, bought out, or overlooked. Not because they weren't talented, but because they made the mistake of not worshiping her. We called ourselves Project Lantern, because we weren't here to burn bridges or burn down old empires. We were here to illuminate the path forward. By the 3rd week, I had 15 full-time team members and 3 venture meetings scheduled. Alton stayed hands-off, just as he promised, but I felt his support in the rooms he opened and the names he whispered in the right ears. Still, it wasn't just about the launch or the product. There was a deeper satisfaction in reclaiming something that had once been mine, my voice, my identity, my damn name. I started reaching out to former Echelon clients, not to poach, but to explain. Some didn't pick up. Some listened, curious but hesitant. But a few. A few asked questions. The right ones. And I answered with clarity, without bitterness, and backed by facts. I showed them what Echelon's predictive system had been doing over the last 6 months, how its accuracy was declining, how it was recommending suboptimal targets, how the very algorithm they trusted was degrading from the inside. And then I showed them Nova. Not the full system, just enough to make their eyes widen. A prototype demo, real-time sentiment mapping, ethical guardrails that could be audited. One exec, a woman named Cassie from a major retail platform, leaned forward after a 30-minute Zoom and said, "Mason, this is going to change everything. When can I get on the beta list?" I didn't need 1 million customers. I needed 10 who believed in what we were doing. But even as we built upward, I couldn't ignore the past. Not because I was stuck in it, but because it still had my fingerprints all over it. So I made an appointment. With a law firm Alton's people recommended. I walked in with my notebook, my laptop, and my thumb drive. I left with something much more valuable, a fully registered patent. My name. My code. Timestamped. Ironclad. I didn't rush to use it. I didn't run to the press. That was Brielle's style. I tucked it away. Quiet. Ready. Because I knew the time was coming. While I met with engineers and brainstormed UI frameworks with Marin, I kept an ear to the ground. I saw the whispers online, forums where developers discussed how Echelon's output was acting weird or not matching the model accuracy anymore. I watched as minor influencers, the kind Echelon used to pride themselves on swaying, began to talk about other options. New players. Open systems. Better data ethics. Brielle was still doing interviews, still hosting her champagne mixers, still laughing on stages in her silk dresses and buzzwords. But underneath it all, I could see the cracks forming. That's what happens when you build a throne on people's backs and forget that one day, they might all stand up. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting on my windowsill, nursing the last of my coffee, when Meyer's name popped up in a news alert. Echelon expands into wearable data tracking. Privacy concerns raised by tech watchdogs. I laughed out loud. Because of course they were doubling down on invasion disguised as innovation. But it was coming. Soon, she'd be sitting at a table she didn't even realize I'd set. Soon, she'd see that the man she thought she erased had never stopped writing. He just picked a better pen. And it would be my signature, mine, that marked the beginning of her end. The conference room was all sharp lines and silence. Glass walls, chrome finishes, matte black leather chairs spaced around a sleek obsidian table that looked like it belonged in a Bond villain's lair. It didn't smell like money, it reeked of it. Fresh cut wood. Espresso. Some subtle cologne engineered to convey dominance. I'd been in rooms like this before, but always beside Brielle. Never across from her. Never opposite. Today was different. 12 people sat at that table, men and women who could write 8-figure checks without blinking. They didn't come for pleasantries. They came for vision, for opportunity, for power. And I had all three. At the head of the table, I stood beside Alton Morrow, who introduced me not as former echelon executive or tech architect, but simply the man building the future. He knew what he was doing. Words matter in rooms like these. He didn't want them seeing me as Brielle's shadow. He wanted them to see me as the light. A presentation played behind us. Marin's design, simple, bold, elegant. Nova's interface moved like liquid glass across the screen, cycling through demo slides, real-time trust metrics, adaptive behavior models, full transparency audits. I didn't pitch like Brielle used to. No buzzwords, no ego, no pretense. I told the truth. We're not selling you a product, I said. We're offering you a foundation. The systems most of you currently use are aging beneath the surface. They're brittle. They're optimized for performance metrics that are outdated before the quarter ends. Nova isn't just predictive, it's perceptive. It's built to understand behavior as it happens, not after the fact. They leaned in. Some nodded. One jotted something in a leather notebook. Then the doors opened, and the air shifted. The click of heels. Confident. Sharp. Measured. Brielle. Draped in navy blue silk, jaw locked tight, lips pressed into a blade of a smile. Her assistant, some blonde kid who looked like he was barely out of business school, followed 2 steps behind, whispering urgently. She ignored him. When she saw me at the front of the room, her stride faltered for half a beat. Just half. But I caught it. Everyone did. She hadn't known I'd be here. Her eyes swept the table, landing on Alton, then flicking to the screen where Nova's logo rotated like a quiet warning. Mason, she said. I turned slowly, keeping my posture relaxed, my voice calm. Brielle. Didn't expect to see you here. It wasn't mockery. It was precision. I met her with the same cool detachment she'd once used to fire me over the phone. The room waited. Every breath held like glass about to crack. She started, but Alton cut in smoothly. Perfect timing, Brielle. We were just walking through the core differentiators between legacy analytics platforms and Mason's Nova system. Fascinating stuff. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then recovered. She smiled that press-friendly smile and stepped forward, voice lacquered in charm. Well, I'm sure it is, she said. But some of us still believe in the systems we already trust. Stability matters. Until it doesn't, I said. Especially when the underlying IP is compromised. Her eyes flared, barely perceptible, but enough. The others glanced between us like spectators at a high-stakes chess match. They didn't know the history, but they could feel it. Something electric. I walked slowly around the table, fingers grazing the back of a chair. I used to sit beside Brielle, I said. Built the system she rides on today. But what most of you don't know is, I never signed over the original architecture. The engine that powered Echelon's rise? The one still running their models? It was mine. Always was. A pause. The kind that chokes a room in tension. Alton leaned forward and slid a folder onto the table. Thick. Sealed. We'll be acquiring full integration rights to Nova, he said. Including the underlying analytics system. Mason's engine. You could feel her mask slipping. Just slightly. Her fingers twitched. Her smile tightened. That system is proprietary, she said carefully. Only if you can prove it, I replied, reaching into my case and pulling out a second folder. I slid it across the table toward her. This might help clarify your legal exposure. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, patent paperwork. Time-stamped. Digitally certified. My name. Not hers. Not Echelon's. The silence became a living thing. Her assistant leaned over her shoulder and whispered something again. She didn't respond. I watched her jaw move, tight, grinding. She closed the folder slowly, methodically. Mason, she said, voice low now. Can we speak privately? No, I said. We're not in private anymore. Because this was the moment I'd been walking towards since that phone call. Not a scene of vengeance, but a reckoning. She'd humiliated me in front of an entire company. Locked me out of my own home. laughed when she thought I had nowhere left to go. And now, I was standing between her and the future. A man beside me. One of the investors, a gray-bearded financier who'd built 3 tech unicorns, cleared his throat. How soon can Nova be operational? I didn't look at Brielle. I looked at him. Beta testing starts in 3 weeks, I said. Full deployment by the next quarter. He nodded. Put me down for 40 million. Another voice chimed in. Then another. Brielle didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there as commitment after commitment stacked around her like bricks. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because I'd already won. And the best part? I hadn't needed to shout or scheme or burn it all down. All I had to do was build something worth standing behind. And sit at the head of the table she never thought I'd reach. She thought the shock was seeing me at the head of the table. She thought that was the twist, Mason, the discarded husband, standing beside her biggest rival, flanked by the very investors who used to hang on her every word. She thought that was the moment where the camera would freeze, the score would rise, and the audience would gasp. But that wasn't it. That was just the opening scene. The real surprise was what came next. Brielle had remained standing long after everyone else settled back into their seats. Her expression had softened into a professional calm, but I could see the tension in her neck, the way her fingers coiled tightly around the folder I'd given her. I'd seen her wear that face during merger calls when she was bluffing with numbers she didn't fully believe. It was the same face she wore the night she convinced me to let her pitch my early prototypes under the Echelon name, just to help us get some traction, she had said. Alton tapped a finger against the folder he dropped earlier, the one detailing the Nova acquisition. As discussed, we'll be taking full integration rights, including analytics architecture, client access frameworks, and future licensing privileges. He leaned back in his chair like a man who already knew the board vote was unanimous. The valuation was finalized this morning. Brielle's voice came out tight. Valuation? 500 million, I said, casually, as if we weren't talking about $500 million worth of intelligence infrastructure. We closed the term sheet before this meeting. Someone across the table let out a low whistle. Another investor smiled to himself, already running numbers. I turned to Brielle. Her eyes were locked on me now, no longer pretending to smile. No longer playing gracious. You can't sell what belongs to Echelon. I'm not selling anything that belongs to Echelon, I said calmly. You would know that if you'd ever taken the time to understand what we were building. You remember that stack of contracts I gave you 2 years ago? The ones you handed to Myra to sort through? You never signed the transfer clause. Legally, the architecture remained mine. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her brain was trying to catch up with her pride. Alton opened his own folder and slid a second document across the table. Here's the kicker, Brielle. This deal doesn't just move us forward, it protects us retroactively. Mason's system has been running at Echelon without a signed transfer of IP rights. Which means you may have unknowingly exposed your firm to unauthorized usage claims. Brielle's eyes flicked to her assistant. He looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. There's no way, she whispered. No one's ever questioned the system. Because it worked, I cut in. But only because I kept it stable from the back end. Every time your output started drifting off target, that was me fixing the code through an access key I buried in the developer log. One that expires tonight, by the way. The room went silent. She swallowed, visibly. Then, as if desperate to reassert control, she said, "We'll take this to court." "You're welcome to," I said, gesturing toward the thick folder she hadn't dared open fully yet. "That's my patent paperwork. Filed, timestamped, verified. The metadata alone proves origin. And even if you tried to dispute authorship, your own system logs, dated commits, login trails, developer notes, all point back to me. And they're already archived with my." I leaned forward. "Yes, you did. You just thought you'd be on the winning side." The investors remained silent, watching her unravel. No one was coming to her defense. No one was offering a lifeline. She wasn't the queen in this room. Not anymore. She was a name on a receding headline, and everyone here knew it. Then I pushed one final document across the table. "This is a courtesy," I said. "A full summary of Echelon's current liability, including usage of my system since the date of the unsigned transfer clause. Retroactive licensing could save you a PR crisis, provided you come to terms by Friday." Her lips moved like she wanted to argue, but there was no argument to make. The walls she'd built weren't made of steel. They were made of glass. And now the sunlight was pouring in. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You planned this." "No," I said. "You did. I just kept the receipts." It was true. Every decision she'd made. Every time she sidelined someone for daring to question her. Every contract she ignored. Every bridge she burned while I sat quietly behind her had paved the road to this moment. She was so sure she didn't need anyone else. So sure she could twist the truth into any shape she wanted. But code doesn't lie. Ownership doesn't forget. And signatures? Well, the ones that aren't signed have consequences too. Alton rose from his chair. This meeting's adjourned. We've got contracts to finalize. The investors stood slowly, murmuring among themselves. Some glanced at Brielle with a mix of curiosity and detachment, like watching a magician caught using cheap tricks. She didn't move. Neither did I. Once the room cleared, it was just the two of us. I stood and looked down at her. You used to say I didn't understand power, I said. But I do now. Power isn't control. It's trust. It's knowing your value, even when someone else tries to erase it. She blinked quickly. The first crack of real emotion passed through her face. Why didn't you ever fight me before? She asked. Because I believed in us, I said. Even when you didn't. I walked out without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, but lighter too. Outside, the sun cut through the skyline like a clean blade, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. This was my story now. And I had just turned the page. The call came just after midnight. I had just shut my laptop, the glow of Nova's latest interface still lingering behind my eyes, and was about to pour myself a quiet drink when the screen of my phone lit up across the table. Unknown number. But I knew. Instinctively. Some part of me recognized the weight behind the silence, the tremble in the digital air even before I answered. Hello, I said. There was a pause. Then her voice. Mason. Brielle didn't sound like herself. Gone was the confident, calculated woman who could sell sand to the desert. Her voice cracked slightly on the syllables, and for a second, I thought maybe it was an imposter. But no, there it was. That falter beneath the breath, the one I'd heard only twice before, the night her father died, and the night her IPO almost collapsed before we patched the numbers behind the scenes. You can't do this, she said quietly. You can't. Mason, we built that system together. I sat back in the armchair by the window, the city glittering faintly beyond the glass like it had no idea a war was ending inside a single conversation. We didn't build it together, I said. I built it. You branded it. You're rewriting history, she snapped, her voice sharpening. You used my connections, my platform, my capital, and I used my brain, I said flatly. We both brought something to the table, Brielle, but only one of us tried to flip the table over. She was quiet again, but I could hear her breathing. Fast. Unsteady. That was rare for her. She'd made a career out of pretending nothing ever rattled her. I didn't think it would go this far, she said finally. No, I agreed. You thought I'd break. Crawl back. Settle for mopping floors while you tossed champagne on the balcony. That wasn't me, she said, like it mattered. Your voice was on the call, I said. Myra laughed in the background. And you didn't stop her. I was angry. No, I cut in. You were arrogant. There's a difference. Her silence then was telling. Waited. She knew it too. I lost sight of things, she said softer now. I kept climbing, and somewhere along the way I forgot how we started. I forgot what you gave up. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how long it had taken her to admit something that had been choking me for years. You didn't forget, I said. You ignored it. There's a difference there too. Mason, listen. No, I said again, firm now. You don't get to frame this like a misunderstanding. You fired me over the phone. You locked me out of the house I paid for. You paraded me as the tech mind behind Echelon until it stopped serving your narrative. You used my work, my trust, and my silence. She was breathing harder now. So what do you want? Is this about revenge? You've made your point. You've humiliated me, Mason. You've won. I didn't want to humiliate you, I said. If I did, I would have gone to the press with everything. I would have leaked internal documents, old emails, broken the story wide open, and made you the villain in every headline. I didn't do that. Then what do you want? She whispered. I looked out the window for a long moment. I want you to learn the difference between being powerful and being respected. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was hoarse. Please, Mason, just tell me what it would take to make this go away. And there it was. The thing I never thought I'd hear from Brielle, desperation. Not the kind that clawed and fought. The kind that wilted. The The kind that came after the freefall, when you realized your parachute was stitched together by ego and guesswork. It's already done, I said. Nova's secured. The contracts are signed. Your access is gone. The system you're still using will degrade until it's unusable. I've given you the courtesy of a retroactive license to avoid litigation. You can take that. Or not. She sounded smaller when she asked, and after that? After that, you figure out who you are without pretending to be the smartest person in the room. Another pause. Then, finally, you really hate me now, don't you? I closed my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but clarity. No, I said. I don't hate you. I pity you. She gasped a little at that. Maybe she'd been bracing for venom. But this cut differently. Because it was clean. Honest. I loved you, I said, the words surprisingly steady. Not the brand. Not the business partner. You. I wanted to build a life. A legacy. But you wanted something shinier. Something that needed me quiet and convenient. I let that sit. Mason. I didn't respond. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time, I believed she meant it. But I didn't say anything back. Some silences are necessary. Some silences are healing. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said finally. I already did, I replied. It was never about beating you, Brielle. It was about becoming myself again. Then I ended the call. No flourish. No final blow. Just silence. I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair, staring at the skyline. For the first time in 2 years, I felt the quiet settle in my chest, not like a weight, but like a breath finally let out. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't revisit old files. I didn't reach for a drink to chase down the echoes. I just sat there, and I slept deep, uninterrupted, and dreamless for the first time in years. Because some battles aren't won with swords. Some are won the moment you realize you don't need to fight anymore. It didn't take long for the headlines to come. 3 days after our last conversation, the digital world cracked open. It began with a whisper. A niche tech blog published a piece titled, Echelon's engine may not be its own. It was the kind of headline most readers would scroll past. But the people who mattered? They didn't scroll. They clicked. They read. They dug deeper. By the end of the week, it wasn't just blogs. It was Techline, Business Current, The Wall Street Sentinel. Whistleblower reveals IP theft inside Echelon Global. Former CTO alleges unauthorized use of proprietary code. Predictive giant facing lawsuit over system rights. I hadn't filed a lawsuit. Not yet. But word spreads fast when the foundation is cracking. The rumor alone was enough to trigger panic. By Friday, the board called an emergency session. I didn't attend. I didn't have to. I got the play-by-play through back channels, texts from former colleagues, industry insiders, even 2 of the investors who had backed Brielle during her ascension. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Brielle was asked to step down. Effective immediately. Myra went with her. Apparently, she tried to defend Brielle during the meeting, tried to redirect the conversation toward market confidence and forward vision. But it backfired. One of the board members reportedly asked, if you're so confident, why was your sister using a system she didn't own? Myra stammered. And just like that, the show was over. There were no cameras. No dramatic walkouts. Just 2 women who had spent years building an empire of image, escorted quietly out of the building by security. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. Because it wasn't a victory. Not really. It was closure. The morning after the announcement, I stood on the balcony of my new office. It wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. It had tall windows, natural light, and the kind of quiet you earn, not purchase. My team was already buzzing downstairs. Marin was holding a design review. 2 engineers were running diagnostics. And Damon, who I'd finally invited to join Nova full-time, was fine-tuning our data hygiene protocol with a level of focus that made me proud. They were building something honest. And they trusted me to lead it. That was the real win. I sipped my coffee and watched the city hum to life. Billboards flashed. Buses roared down avenues. Somewhere, someone else was getting blindsided by betrayal, by ego, by the kind of miscalculation that costs more than money. But not me. Not anymore. At noon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Lock access termination confirmation. It was from a security firm I'd hired weeks ago, the day after Brielle changed the locks on what had been our home. The email was brief. Per your request, all biometric and keycard access to the former residence has been disabled. Systems have been rekeyed to your private signature. You are now the sole property owner on record. I read it twice. Not because I was surprised, but because I wanted to feel what that truly meant. The locks they changed to keep me out? They were guarding nothing worth keeping. The house was a shell now. She had left it behind when the board ousted her. My attorney handled the paperwork quietly, transferring the deed after an unpaid tax violation surfaced. Echelon had covered a lot of Brielle's personal costs. Once that dam broke, the unraveling was swift. I could have sold the house. I still might. But for now, it stood as a quiet monument. Not to what we lost, but to what I survived. Later that afternoon, I walked into the old Echelon headquarters. Not as an employee, not as a visitor, just as a man returning to a place that no longer held power over him. Someone else's name was on the door now. A new interim CEO brought in to stabilize the company and mitigate the damage. A damage control expert. He didn't know me. Didn't need to. I didn't stop. I didn't knock on old doors or peer through glass walls. I just walked the perimeter once, breathing in the sterile, lemon-scented air of a company trying desperately to pretend it wasn't bleeding. There were whispers in the halls. Familiar faces glanced at me, then looked away. Not in shame, just recognition. Like they knew I had seen the inside of the storm and walked out unburned. Outside, I stood on the same sidewalk where I had once carried my laptop in silence, fired by the woman I built a future with. Back then, I felt erased. Now, I felt whole. I took the long way home, not because I had anything to prove, but because the air was crisp and I had time. Time to reflect. Time to breathe. Time to finally believe that I was free. And the funny thing? I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Brielle. Not at Myra. Not even at myself. Because for all the destruction they tried to bring into my life, they also gave me something I couldn't have discovered otherwise. A reminder that power taken by force can always be taken back. But power earned through integrity, resilience, and relentless truth? That's unshakable. Let the headlines keep circling. Let the analysts debate the fall. Let the investors reassign their loyalties. As for me, I wasn't watching anymore. I was building. And every brick, every line of code, every honest conversation with my team was a new beginning. A beginning no one could take from me. Not again. The wind was gentler than usual that morning, cool, dry, tugging at my coat as I stood across the street from Echelon's old headquarters. The sun had just climbed over the skyline, throwing soft gold light across the upper windows. There was a new logo above the entryway now, sleek, minimalist, expensive. A name I didn't recognize, some acquired brand with no soul behind it, just a placeholder until the building reinvented itself again. I didn't cross the street. Didn't get any closer than the sidewalk. I didn't need to. This was no longer my war zone. No longer the place where I'd ground my fingers against a keyboard at 2 in the morning to salvage another earnings report. No longer the stage for whispered betrayals, for watching the woman I loved slowly twist into someone I didn't recognize. No longer the pedestal I once stood on, only to find the foundation had been rotting beneath me. I took one last look at the building, then turned away. Closure didn't need fireworks. My new office was 5 blocks east, modest, intentionally underdesigned, tucked inside a repurposed industrial building with exposed brick and coffee-stained floors. You had to buzz twice at the entrance and walk past a bookstore to find it. That was how I wanted it. No marble. No nonsense. Inside, my team was already working. Damon was on a call in the open meeting space, a notebook full of scribbles in his lap. Marin was half sitting on a desk, chewing a pin cap while reviewing wireframes with one of the developers. Everyone was moving, alive, humming with energy, not because someone was watching, but because they believed in what we were building. Because they had a stake in it. A voice in it. That's what Nova had become, not just a product, not just a platform, but a philosophy. And the difference was this. People weren't afraid to speak here. I walked past the coffee machine, dropped my bag on my desk, and slid open the drawer. Inside was a pen. Nothing fancy. Just a black matte fountain pen I'd bought for myself the day the Nova acquisition closed. I hadn't used it yet. Until now. I pulled out the folder on my desk, something I'd been working on for weeks in the background, the roadmap for Nova 2.0. It wasn't about expanding the client base or maximizing margins. It was about evolution. About widening the scope of what behavioral analytics could do. Using it not just to understand consumer patterns, but to help people make decisions that align with their values, their mental health, their long-term goals. A partnership between AI and agency. Not manipulation. Collaboration. I clicked the pen open and signed the top page with a quiet stroke of ink. My name. My vision. Not hers. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting the hum of the office settle around me like a second skin. This wasn't what I thought success would look like. It wasn't penthouses or headlines. It was peace. It was walking into a space and not bracing for impact. It was not checking the door twice. Not wondering who was whispering behind your back or pulling the strings just out of view. It was knowing that the people around you weren't afraid to say your name out loud. That you could be human here, flawed, evolving, but present. A knock sounded at my glass wall. I turned. Damon stood there, holding up 2 coffees and an envelope. "Mail for you," he said, stepping inside. I took the coffee with a nod and opened the envelope. It was from my attorney. Inside, final confirmation that the last remnant of my IP dispute had been closed, sealed, and settled. No residual claims. No litigation pending. My name, officially and permanently, was attached to every line of code that built Nova. And Echelon? They'd signed the licensing agreement for retroactive use just 1 hour before the statute ran out. Quietly. No press release. No statement. They folded the same way they rose, strategically, surgically, without apology. Damon watched me read it, eyebrows raised. "Good news. The best kind," I said. "The kind that doesn't need to be shouted." He grinned and tapped the coffee cup. "You know, this whole thing's been kind of cinematic." I smirked. "You've been watching too many documentaries." "I mean, come on," he said. "Guy gets blindsided by his wife, fired from his own company, disappears for a while, and then comes back swinging with something better. That's a screenplay waiting to happen." I shrugged. "It's just life." He looked around the office, at the team scribbling on whiteboards and typing through meetings, then back at me. "You really don't feel like rubbing it in?" "Why?" I said. "They already know. And I'm not writing this story for them anymore." He nodded slowly, then turned to leave. "Still, if you ever need someone to play you in the movie, let me know. I've been practicing my calm but devastating monologues." I laughed. A real one. When he left, I turned back to the window, my fingers running along the edge of the signed page. I thought back to the man I was that day Brielle called. The man who stared out an office window, blindsided, heartbroken in two, told by the woman he trusted most that he was disposable. That man didn't exist anymore. I didn't want him back. I was the man with the pen now. The man who rewrote the ending. And more importantly, the one writing the next chapter. Not for revenge. Not for approval. But for peace. For purpose. Because I learned the hard way, success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about finally remembering who you are and choosing to be that person every damn day without asking for permission. Outside, the city pulsed on. But inside, I was still, whole. And this time, I held the pen.